Hi friends, thank you so much for connecting with me today. I do appreciate you giving me a few minutes of your time today. We're continuing our series that we started, I guess last week, was it? Called Summer Songs, talking about different psalms through the summer. And last week we talked about Psalm 23, the 23rd Psalm, kind of a famous one. And today we're talking about Psalm 31, okay? And we'll get to that in just a second. I'm sure that you have lived long enough to know that in our human experience, we have a very wide range of thoughts and emotions attached to our experience, right? So we can go from, having great joy in one season of our life to having great sorrow in another season. We can go from thinking or having feelings of, great faith and optimism for the future. And then, the next week we can have, doubt or, great pessimism or whatever about the future, right? Being a human being means that we experience a wide range of thoughts and emotions. And we're going to see that in our psalm today. In fact, it's quite a common theme, maybe a common pattern, that would maybe be a better thing to say, a very common pattern in the Psalms that quite often the psalmist, whether it's David, who in our case today wrote Psalm 31, whether it's David or another writer of a psalm, will begin often with a great profession of faith, or a great statement about God and his great power, like a very optimistic, positive statement at the beginning. And then in the middle, quite often, is a very, very honest expression of how the writer is feeling. And then at the end, we'll finish quite often with another statement of faith and confidence, right? Often it goes from confidence, God is so great, he is my fortress, to like, wow, I'm really struggling here, to at the end, God is my fortress kind of thing. And so again, we're going to see that today. So let's read. From Psalm 31, I'm going to read just little excerpts. We won't read the whole thing, but Psalm 31, verses 1 to 3. O Lord, I have come to you for protection. Don't let me be disgraced. Save me, for you do what is right. Turn your ear to listen to me. Rescue me quickly. Be my rock of protection, a fortress where I will be safe. You are my rock and my fortress. See how David, be my rock and fortress. You are my rock and fortress, right? It's a statement of confidence. It's a statement of God, you've got me kind of thing. And then in verse 7, he says, I will be glad and rejoice in your unfailing love. So let me just pause for a second. This imagery of God being our rock and our fortress is very common again in the Psalms. And, maybe when David was writing this, he was thinking about when he was hiding from Saul, running for his life, hiding from King Saul, who was trying to kill him, and they were hiding in caves. In fact, all through Israel, right up and down, there are cliffs with very soft stone, and so tons and tons, thousands and thousands of caves. In fact, maybe I'll put up a picture here of one particular cave. But this is the cave of Qumran, but that's kind of another story. These caves, thousands and thousands of caves just dotting the cliffs for miles and miles and miles, right? And it would be in a similar cave like this that David would have hidden from Saul when he was being hunted down, right? So maybe David had in his mind, when he talked about being my rock, being my fortress, maybe he had one of these caves in mind. Or Jerusalem is built kind of on, I wouldn't call it a mountain, the finger. It's hard to describe, but a very, very big hill. Let's put it that way. Jerusalem is built on a very big hill. And when you build a city on a hill, and of course there are walls, then it becomes very difficult for the enemy to attack and conquer that city, right? Because of the advantage of the height. And so maybe David had Jerusalem in his mind when he wrote, this psalm about being my rock, being my fortress. But basically what David was saying is that when I am in you, Lord, I am in a position of strength and safety, security. Why? Because you are my God, right? So David begins Psalm 31, with this great profession. You are my rock and my fortress. Verse 7, I will be glad and rejoice in your unfailing love. But then watch what David does here. He gets really, really honest about his range of human emotions. He says in verse 13, have mercy on me, Lord, for I am in distress. Tears blur my eyes. My body and soul are withering away. I'm dying from grief. My years are shortened by sadness. Sin has drained my strength. I am wasting away from within. I am scorned by all my enemies and despised by my neighbors. Even my friends are afraid to come near me. When they see me on the street, they run the other way. I am ignored as if I were dead, as if I were a broken pot. I have heard many rumors about me, and I'm surrounded by terror. My enemies conspire against me, plotting to take my life. It's hard to believe that David, just like a few sentences earlier, said, you are my rock, you are my fortress, I will be glad and rejoice in your unfailing love. And then it's like, man, I am in serious trouble here. The backstory behind why David wrote this psalm, we don't know exactly, but I think there's a very good chance that David wrote this psalm when his son Absalom staged a violent coup, a violent coup d'etat, and took over the city of Jerusalem. And Absalom took over the throne, his father's throne, and booted David out of Jerusalem. And David had to run for his life, literally, because his son staged a violent coup against him, right? So you can imagine, like in real life, you can imagine, this isn't just some fairy tale, you can imagine that David was like absolutely destroyed, not even because somebody staged a violent coup against him, but his flesh and blood, his son Absalom, did this to his father, right? And so you hear it in his language, like he's gutted by what Absalom has done. I am in distress. Tears blur my eyes. I'm dying from grief, that kind of thing. And then David says something interesting in verse 10. He says, sin has drained my strength. I am wasting away from within. We don't have time to talk about it today, but there's a very clear connection between David's sin, his failure with Bathsheba, and that failure came back to bite him directly. I could draw a direct line for you that David's sin, his failure with Bathsheba, came back to bite him in this conspiracy, this coup by his son, right? And so David is lamenting a lot of stuff. There's a ton of emotions attached here, and part of it is wrestling with his own personal failure, right? So David begins his Psalm 31 with the statement of, Lord, you are my rock, you are my fortress, your unfailing love. And then verses 9 to 13, man, my life is really cratering here. I'm in serious trouble. And then David finishes again with confidence. Verse 14, I am trusting you, O Lord, saying you are my God. So, but listen to verse 24. So be strong and courageous, all you who put your hope in the Lord, right? David has this wide range of emotions. And as I read this and as I think about it, I think, well, like, which one is it, David? Are you feeling strong? Are you feeling courageous? Or are you feeling like despair and pain and sorrow? Which one is it? And the answer, I think, is yes. It's both, actually. David at the and this gets to the core of what it means to be human, and it gets to the core of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. That in our worst moments, when we're really, really hurting, like worst case scenario, when we're really hurting, we have this bedrock of hope. We have this bedrock of strength. We have this bedrock of God, Jesus, that we can draw strength from. So things might be, really bad, but I can look to God for hope. Things might be really bad, but I can look to God for strength. Things might be really bad, but I can look to God for guidance and, whatever provision, whatever I need, right? Those two things can actually coexist. And friends, I'd like to just, on Sunday, we're going to have a discussion around the tables, like, what do you think about the wide range of human emotions, and how do you process it when you're feeling despair? How do you process faith in God when you're feeling despair, that kind of thing. So let me just share, if I were sitting around the table with you, a couple of things that I think about this. The first thought is that, I say, like, a minute ago I said, like, which one is it, David? Is it hope and strength, or is it despair and pain, right? Which one is it? And the answer is it's both. It's a big part of what it means to be human, and a big part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, to hold those two things in tension. And we can feel pain and sorrow and look up to God for our strength and comfort, right? And this is, I think, a really important thing, that we don't have to deny the reality of a situation. In fact, it's not healthy to deny the reality of a situation. It's what we call toxic positivity. Have you ever heard that? Toxic positivity, like, the world may be falling apart down around your knees, and you go, oh, it's okay. Like pretending that it's not as bad as it is, or somehow minimizing how painful it is. That's called toxic positivity, and we don't have to do that. We can be honest, just like David was honest, and we can say, wow, this is really, really hard, right? And at the same time, we can hold on to hope in God, and we can hold on to His strength and His protection and His provision, right? So they both can coexist, and they both can actually work together, okay? So that's my first thought. We don't have to deny the painful situation in order to trust and believe in God. My second thought is that I'd actually like to pick up on something that David says in Psalm 27. In Psalm 27, it follows a very similar pattern. There's this statement of faith at the beginning, and then wrestling with pain in the middle, and then a statement of faith at the end. It's a very similar pattern, Psalm 27 and Psalm 31. In Psalm 27, David again says something very interesting. In verse 4, he says, "The one thing I ask of the Lord, the thing I seek most, is to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's perfections and meditating in His temple." And then verse 11, he says, "Teach me how to live, O Lord. Lead me along the right path." Now again, remember, this is in the context of him really, really suffering and struggling and expressing his pain, right? And he says in the middle of that, "Teach me how to live, O Lord. Lead me along the right path." I think that a key thing in wrestling with suffering, a key thing in wrestling with whatever word you might give it, despair, doubt, whatever it might be, a key thing is doing our best to walk in the way of Jesus, right? Let me read this, and then I'll comment a little further. Jesus kind of says something very similar at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. So in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus gives some really, really good life advice. Like if you read nothing else of the Bible and nothing else about the life of Jesus, if you just read the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 6 and 7, and you apply that, you build your life on that, then you'll be doing really, really well, right? The Sermon on the Mount is kind of the focus, the summary of the life and teaching of Jesus. So he gives really, really good life advice, right, in the Sermon on the Mount. And then Jesus says at the very end in Matthew 7:24 and 25, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise, the winds beat against that house, it won't collapse. Why? Because it's built on bedrock. Friends, I think that a key word, a key idea in this whole thing is obedience. We may, of course, we're humans and we're going to suffer and we're going to have doubts and we're going to have all kinds of stuff. But if we can look at ourselves in the mirror and say, I've done my best to live the Jesus life. I've done my best to reflect Jesus as best I can, in this painful situation. If we've done our best to live the Jesus life, then Jesus says that when let me just read it again. Anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents, the flood waters rise, and the winds beat against that house, it won't collapse. Why? Because it's built on bedrock, right? A key thing in processing all of our human emotions, the good and the bad, the bad and the ugly, is doing our best to pattern our lives after Jesus and to live obedient to the teachings of Jesus, to live the Jesus life. Okay, so those are my thoughts, and on Sunday we'll be interested to hear what you have to say around the tables. So I'm going to let you go, and I hope you have a good day, a great day, and hopefully we'll see you on Sunday. God bless you, friends.